What's the most important piece of advice you'd give to somebody considering buying a home, Jim?
Well, for most Canadians, the equity in their home is, in fact, their most important investment that they'll ever make in their life. So you should think of it as an investment. But different from financial investments, it's an investment you can actually use. You live in your house and you actually get value from it and for your family by virtue of living in it. So I think the most important advice is to make sure it's a home that fits your family, that it meets your family's actual needs, that the size is right. Obviously, that you can afford it in terms of the down payment and the monthly carrying fees. Make sure also that you can afford the maintenance on it. You have to keep up that asset. But I think first and foremost, we should think of a house as a place to live in more than a way to try and make money.
Preet, you give personal financial advice. What's the rule of thumb here?
No, I agree with Jim. It has to be a long-term decision. If you move too often, which a lot of people do these days, they go into a house for 2-3 years and all of a sudden they want to upgrade, you're going to get killed in the transaction fees. So what I recommend for people is you have to make sure that you're going to be putting down roots in a community if you're thinking about buying a house first and foremost. And the second thing is you want to have a margin of safety. So what that means is you don't want to get the most amount of house that you can afford and just absolutely stretch your budget. You want to have a big margin of safety there, because if you don't, it leads to a lot of stress. And, you know, we talk about the numbers, but philosophically or psychologically rather, you know, not having enough money causes stress, which causes basically marital strife. Then the sex stops, and then basically it's all downhill from there.
You give all this advice in your column here?
It's 90% psychology and 8% numbers. And you know what happens, and there's stories about this in Vancouver. There's stories about people who have broken up basically, but they can't leave the house because it's too expensive to leave. So you're stuck there in a loveless, sexless marriage for 20-30 years. Doesn't make any sense.
Jeez, this is not going where I thought it was going. Man.
Took a wrong turn into the wrong studio. I agree, actually, wholeheartedly. I mean, in my view, the advice I would give people is if you're looking at a 10-year mortgage, think of that as, is this somewhere I want to live for 10 years? Think of this as an alternative investment, just like a piece of art. And you wouldn't buy a piece of art that you hate to look at. It's got to be somewhere you want to stay. The most important thing to my mind right now is, can you afford it when rates go back to normal? They're not normal. We hope they only go to normal. They could well shoot right past to fight inflation. Do some math and make sure that in the next few years you've got the cash flow to hold it up.
What is the acceptable percentage now of your income that should be going to mortgage?
40% is a number that we hear about, and that's a number the Bank of Canada quotes, that once interest rates go back to normal, and we're a long way from normal, so let's be clear about that. Normal for the Bank of Canada is about 4%. We're at 1%. So once they go back to normal, the bank estimates that 10% of Canadians, or a million Canadians, will be in trouble because the debt servicing component, including the mortgage, is going to go over 40%. And that's why there's so much focus on this right now. Because of the debt levels, we are very sensitive to changes in interest rates, and those are now right around the corner.
So I guess what you're saying is don't make your calculations based on the rates that are offered today.
Rate. So say you're getting a mortgage at 4% for 5 years, do the math at 6% and 8%. So assume they go up by 50 or 100% within a fairly short period of time.
You should be able to handle a doubling of the mortgage rate, because that is absolutely within the realm of the feasible. Yeah. And if doubling the mortgage rate doesn't cause you too much distress in your hypothetical budget, then you're probably fine.
Okay, when should you get into the market? What's a good time to be getting in?
Well, when it comes to home ownership, I think a lot of people are convinced that they have to buy a house, and that's one of their life goals. And I think given today's environment, I would actually say, you know, maybe you should consider renting for a while. So the long-term house price to annual rent ratio is 15, right? So if a house is $360,000, that's about $2,000 a month in rent. So if you had two houses side by side on a street, and one was for sale for $360,000 and one was for rent for $2,000 a month, it would be a wash. You could go into either way. But right now what you're seeing is that the rents are much lower than those house prices because it's so out of whack. So I would actually suggest to people, you know, if there is such a disparity between rents and house prices, then rent for a while and pocket the difference. If you want to build up equity, you can do it in other ways than home equity.
Well, where are you on this rent versus buy?
Well, I'm a big fan of renting. The problem is that a lot of Canadian cities don't have rental stock adequately at the moment. But I don't see any reason why you can't rent and invest your savings elsewhere. You do need to save. Most of us don't have the discipline. So the house is kind of a disciplined way to keep paying. You pay the mortgage and you build up equity. We need, I think, to stop thinking of houses as a surefire way to get rich, because our parents and our grandparents bought a little house. They stayed in it for 30 years. They didn't move. They kept the same jobs, and lo and behold, they could retire off that house. Most of us will have to move to follow jobs. We may want to move for other reasons. So I would say, you know, back to the point of get a 10-year mortgage in a house you want for 10 years, make sure you're ready for it. If you're not, don't do it.